Good evening, everybody, and welcome, or welcome back, to the channel. If you enjoy tonight's narration and stories, please feel free to hit the like button and leave a comment, as every little bit does help. If you enjoy what I'm doing here on the channel and would like to see it continue and would like to see it grow, then please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be updated every time I upload new content. If you have any of your own stories that you would like to have narrated here on this channel, then please feel free to send those in to ashes to ashes, dust to dust stories at gmail.com, whether they be true or fiction. If you have a story of the creepy, the paranormal, or the downright sinister, then send those in. And if I choose to read them, I'll give you a shout out in the video, as well as a shout out in the description. You'll find the spelling for the email address to send those stories in the description box down below. And now, without further ado, let's get into tonight's scary stories. My neighbor was a murderer. I think I was almost a victim. So this happened in 2013. This kid named Ricky moved in next door to me when he was around 12, and for lack of a better term, this kid was pretty much a pussy. I remember one time he fell on his skateboard and didn't land hard at all, and was crying his little heart out in my driveway when he was 16. So fast forward to when this kid is 18. By then, I'm selling coke and Molly pretty heavily, and he's one of my best customers. By now, he's hanging with some pretty shady people, which my parents obviously aren't a fan of. My parents also didn't know I ever was selling anything, because I was pretty good at keeping it under wraps. Ricky was clearly a follower. He went from the skater/emo type to some wannabe thug, which he just wasn't built for. So my parents go to the Outer Banks of North Carolina every year for 2 weeks, and ask if I'll come stay at the house while they're gone, which I was excited about, because their house is much better than the shitty little one-bedroom apartment I had at the time. So everything was going fine at the house. I had my on-again, off-again girlfriend over all the time, and there was quite a bit of drugs and alcohol going on. I was far from a saint back then. I'll never forget it. It was a Thursday night. My girl had left a few hours ago. I should say earlier that day, Ricky had seen me out front of my parents and had asked for a front. I told him no, considering I never fronted anyone, and in all honesty, I had been using too much of my own shit, so I couldn't really afford to. He didn't like that very much. We got into an argument, and I pretty much punked him in front of all of his little friends. So by now, it's about 2 in the morning, and I'm obviously nowhere near tired because of all the coke and molly. I'm sitting in the dark, watching Netflix in this den/side living room my parents had in the downstairs, which has a window going outside, which I had opened. I had paused the TV and was on my phone texting and on Facebook when I hear something. It's the screen of my window slowly being slid up. I know the sound. I had snuck in and out of this house numerous times growing up. So I slowly get up and watch the window. I clearly see the screen moving very slowly up through the curtains. So I walk up to the window, and as soon as I move the curtain, at least 3 or 4 people scatter. I run out front, but they're booking it down the street. I knew it was that Ricky kid and his friends. I didn't see them, but I knew it was those shitheads. I didn't call the cops or anything, 'cause I wasn't exactly living on the right side of the law. So I just go back in and lock everything up, and the rest of the week goes smooth. I never told my parents about it, and I also never saw Ricky again. Called him a few times, which he never answered, which was all the more reason to know it was him, and he knew that I knew. So a month goes by, and I'm watching the news, and Ricky is on it for murder, which blows my mind. Him and 3 of his friends went out of town, broke into some couple's home, beat 'em up, tied 'em up, and stabbed 'em. Then they burnt the house down after robbing it. They all ended up telling on each other, and he got sentenced to 35 years for testifying against his co-defendants. Makes me wonder, if I was asleep when they got in, what could have happened? Psycho next door. I had moved to a new neighborhood when I was 16. My old neighborhood was full of kids my age to hang out with. We would go out and do stuff and come to each other's houses all the time. But now that I was in this new neighborhood, I didn't know anybody. This all started on the first day I moved, when I was unpacking myself. My mom came into the room and asked if I needed any help. I was almost done. My mom left the room and I finished. I decided to walk in the neighborhood. It looked nice, and it was a nice day. As I was walking, I was texting and tripped. My phone dropped on one of the neighbors' lawns. I got up and went to grab it when I heard a voice. "Hey kid, what are you doing?" I looked up to see an angry old man on the porch. I told him I was only trying to get my phone, but he kept yelling at me not to get on his lawn. I suddenly heard another voice. "Relax, old man." I looked to see a boy who looked to be my age, come up next to me. He just wants to get his phone. The old man gave the boy an angry look. I picked up my phone, and the man went inside angrily. The boy looked at me. "Don't worry about him," he says. "He's just psycho." I tell him it's all right. I thank him for helping me out. He tells me no problem. "My name's Jer," the boy tells me. "Well, it's really Jerry, but I go by Jer. What's yours?" "Elliot," I tell him. He smiles and asks me how old I am. I tell him my age, and he says that he is indeed that age as well. He asked me if I wanted to hang out, and I agree. He shows me to this arcade. He says it's the best one in town. I go along with it because I like arcades myself. After a few minutes, we're playing one of the games. I was in the middle of playing when I noticed this girl walking towards us. Jer has this grin on his face when he looks at her. She just gives him a dirty look and walks off. I asked him what that was all about. He tells me she was just a bitch. We continue playing games around the arcade. After a day at the arcade, I arrive home and tell Jer I'll see him around. He says that I will because he lives right next door to me and points to the house to the right of mine. I smile and tell him I'll see him tomorrow and head inside. The next day I get up and eat breakfast. After finishing, there's a knock on my door and I answer it. It's Jer. "Want to hang out?" he asks. I tell him yes and go to change. We go on our way. I see a guy riding his bike, and when he rides past us, he looks a little scared. I look to see Jer giving him the finger as he rides off. I look at him and ask him who that was. He said it was a kid who's giving him problems. He then suggests about taking a walk in the woods. I agree. When we head to the woods and walk around, I always thought it was peaceful in the woods. I don't know. It always just felt nice. This is where things started to take a weird turn. I got separated from Jer for a little bit. Once I did, I noticed rumbling noises coming from the bushes. I was alarmed. What came out of the woods shocked me. A guy that had been beaten and was bleeding was crawling out of the woods. He grabbed onto me. He yells to me in a pain-filled voice. I grabbed his arm and put it around my neck. I make my way to find Jer. I called his name, but I noticed a look of fear in the guy's eyes. Jer came to me and immediately noticed the guy. He gave him a look. I told him we should get him to a hospital. Jer slowly nods his head, never taking his eyes off the guy. We get him to a hospital and sit in a waiting room. I tell Jer I hope the guy will be okay. Jer just turns and looks at me, but says nothing. After a while, he just walks out of the hospital. One of the doctors came and asked if I would like to see the guy. I tell him yes, and go to his room. I asked if he's alright. He gives a cautious look around, but then looks at me. He tells me he's fine. I asked him what his name was, and he told me it was Gary. I asked him who did this to him. Gary looks at me for a few seconds, and then says, "Jer." I look at Gary in shock. I couldn't believe it. Gary then tells me that he's been hanging out with Jer, but wanted to stop because he found out that Jer was a psycho. Not only that, but he witnessed Jer do some really strange things. He said that he told Jer he didn't want to hang out anymore last night. He then told me that earlier in the morning, Jer knocked on his door and asked him to talk things over. Gary agreed and went. As the two were talking, Gary didn't notice that they ended up in the woods. Jer tackled him to the ground and started beating him. He then left him as he bled out on the ground. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and told Gary I need to go home, and I tell him I hope he gets well. I leave the hospital only to see Jer standing outside looking at me. He walked up to me. "What did he say to you?" he asked. "Look, man," I said, "I need to go home." "What did he say to you?" Jer repeats, this time in a more threatening voice. I look at him and walk away quickly. I turn around to see him just staring at me. Later on, I'm at home watching TV by myself, thinking about what happened today. Suddenly, I hear a knock at my door. I look out the window, but see nobody. I then open my door, but again, nobody's there. I shrug it off as me just hearing things and go back to watching TV. A few minutes later, I hear tapping coming from the kitchen window. I ignore it, thinking I'm just hearing things. It then gets louder, and I go and look out the window. Nobody was there. I know I didn't hear things this time. Suddenly, I hear a tapping noise coming from the window in the living room. I go back in there and look out, but this time I see someone running to the side of my house. I panic and look at every window downstairs. Nobody was there. I then decided to call the police. Just as I was about to pick up the phone, it rang. I answered. "Hello?" A heavy breathing noise came from the other side. Suddenly, the power went off. I was really freaked out now. I was home alone with my power out, at night, with someone outside my house. Just then, I hear glass break. I run to the kitchen and see a hooded figure. I manage to get my cell phone out of my pocket. I was so freaked out, I forgot it was in there. I turned the light on and the figure ran towards me and tackled me to the ground. He had a knife and was using his other hand to go for a punch. but I was able to block it and kick him off of me. I ran towards the front door, but the figure grabbed me and pulled me further into the house. The knife was at my neck. I struggled, but elbowed him off of me as he opened a door and tried to pull me in. The figure recovered and tackled me to the door, and we fell down the stairs. I realized we just fell in the basement. I used my phone's light and see the knife. He makes a grab for it, but I kick it away. The figure then grabs me and starts to punch me, but I fought back. The figure then goes for another punch, but I block it and punch him hard in the face, sending him down. I ran out of the basement and out the front door. I go to Jer's house and knock on the door. His mom answers, and I tell her to call the police. I wait on the couch just as the police arrive. Jer's mom comes down the stairs and tells me he's not in his room. I go outside and see the police coming out with the guy with his hood off. I looked, and in horror I saw it was Jer. He gives me a look of hatred as he gets put in the car. His parents are in shock. The police then tell me this isn't the first problem he had with them. They told me they arrested him multiple times for assault and even stabbing someone. He also apparently didn't have many friends due to his behavior. He would freak out and start beating on people. I had a look of disbelief. I had been hanging out with a psycho. My parents were called, and they came and hugged me. Jer's family moved out not long after that. I haven't seen him since, and I hope I never do. Killer duplex neighbor. This incident is tough for me to talk about. I am a 27-year-old male and was living in New Hampshire at the time, in an extremely safe town. I lived alone with my dog Toby during this time and worked 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. Sharing a duplex was new to me and quite different, especially when your neighbors were very odd. It was a lady in her 60s and a younger man in his 30s. I believed they were a mother and son because they wouldn't speak to me. I had no clue. I tried making small talk, but neither one of them said a word. The mother looked beat down, with gray hair, and she wore the same blue nightgown every time I saw her. I would see the son smoking outside, wearing the same white wife beater since I moved in 7 months prior. It was a summer night in July, around 11 p.m. I let Toby out in the backyard. Now mind you, I do share a backyard with these creeps. Toby was running around, and I heard the neighbor's slide door open. I saw the younger man and his wife beater walk out onto his deck and give me a death glare. My heart dropped, and I began feeling extremely anxious. I saw him reach in his pocket and pulled out a gun. He pointed it at Toby and fired 4 times. I screamed louder than I ever have in my life. The man ran inside and closed his door. I began sprinting toward Toby, but he fled into the woods. I immediately called 911 and told them what happened. The police arrived in 5 minutes and surrounded our duplex. They placed me in a police car and asked me to recount to them what happened. My dog Toby never barked and was the most well-behaved puppy, so he had no excuse to shoot him. The cops were outside about 15 minutes when they heard 3 gunshots. They rushed inside and found the mother and son deceased, both from bullet wounds. Come to find out, the son had shot his mother twice and committed suicide with a single shot to the head. Later that night, Toby came back and was shot in his back leg. After a couple of surgeries, he came back brand new. This was the most horrific thing I have ever witnessed, and am blessed